Hi, welcome. My name is Peter Calabrese. I am the CEO of CanAm Investor Services. CanAm Investor Services is the wholly owned broker-dealer affiliate of CanAm Enterprises, one of the largest, most successful regional centers in the history of the EB-5 program. I have the great pleasure of being joined today by Mr. Michael Harris. Michael is the principal of Harris Law based in Miami, Florida. And he is going to join me today to talk about the different aspects of job creation and how that goes into an EB-5 investment. Michael, welcome. How are you?
Great, Pete. Thanks for having me here.
My pleasure. It's great to have you. And this is job creation in EB-5 is really a subject that gets thrown around a lot. And I think a lot of times people will just look at this and they'll look at it as a very bare minimum of well, what do I need to get from job creation? There's going to be 10 jobs per investor, right? And they kind of go past it. And it's a subject that's vitally important to the success of an EB-5 investment, but sometimes gets a little bit overlooked. So what I really wanted to do today was take an opportunity to dive in a little bit deeper on some of these aspects of job creation and help to educate people on what they should be looking for and why some of these different things are meaningful. So what we're going to start with is talking about just the different capital stack components, how that impacts job creation. We're going to talk about the modeling and job forecasts that go into regional center projects. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the risks that should be looked for when looking at job creation. Michael, how's that sound?
Excellent. Great topic. It's one of the two most important things other than sustainment of capital. Job creation is the most important metric for the success of an EB-5 investor.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more because again, when you're looking at going into an EB-5 investment, when done right, what you're looking to do is to get your full immigration, to get your repayment of funds. And the job creation is one of the most important aspects of it that comes at one of the later stages of the project. So I guess to maybe kick it off, Michael, maybe you could just talk about the different capital stack components and help the people who are listening here understand how those come into a typical EB-5 capital stack and the roles of maybe equity, mezzanine financing, senior debt, subordinate loans, kind of clarify how these certain different parts will impact the flexibility of a project to create jobs.
So the capital stack that you'll see in any properly prepared private placement offering will break it down into uses of funds and sources of funds for that capital stack. You should see the total cost of the project that is in there and the different sources of where that capital that's being used for the project is going to be coming from. So you will typically see loans or financing in the capital stack in the deck, the layers of the project, as well as equity and maybe other financing as well in there. Particularly, you might see government related capital that might be in there or financing that should be delineated or I think specified in there as a source. And then the use will show you how that money in the stack that's being received from those different sources of equity, debt, finance, other types of capital coming in through, maybe it's a tax credit that doesn't actually get realized for many years, for example, how that's actually going to be spent on which parts of the project. Is it going to be on the construction? Is it going to be on operations and so on?
Awesome. Thank you. And so when job creation happens, when all this different spending comes in, is it just the EB-5 funding? Like say if someone's EB-5 project is structured as debt, or say it's structured as equity. If someone's going into a job, is the job creation only coming from that spending that happens from that EB-5 component or from the other sources?
No. Yeah. Right. It's not limited only to the funding that the EB-5 investor is utilizing. All of the uses of funds that are being utilized in the project towards the development of the project can be utilized in the creation of jobs that are being predicted by the modeling and job forecasts. So if the EB-5 investor funds are resulting in 30% of the capital stack, and let's just give it a round number and say that's $30 million, then the other $70 million that is being spent on the project can be used in the calculations of the jobs that are being created by the project. So the EB-5 investor is not just limited only to the effects or the outputs from just their spending that is, or their money that's going into the project.
Great. Yeah. So in theory, when you're looking at this project, it would be safe to say that theoretically this project would not be happening but for the EB-5 funding that's going into it. So all the spending on this entire and all the economic benefit can be counted towards the EB-5
Right, right,
dollar.
right.
Great.
And that brings up another point of, I guess you want to make sure, right, that you're not investing in a project that doesn't if it doesn't have all of that stack fulfilled, absent an EB-5 investor, that might be a flag if they're dependent on the EB-5 capital to finish the project.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And so just to maybe step back and take a look at some of the basics of job creation, we talk about this as a component. When do these jobs need to be created? And I guess to be clear, well, I guess let's start. When do these jobs need to be created, and when did these jobs that have been created need to be documented?
So the government in their policy has said that they generally over time have looked to a 2.5 year rule that says 2.5 years from the adjudication or the approval of the immigrant petition, those jobs need to be actually put into place or actually created at that time. However, jobs can be created prior to the time the EB-5 petition is adjudicated. And that can be fine, especially because jobs that are created under these models are jobs that are created permanently in the economy based on those reasonable economic methodologies. So they may occur beforehand, but the rule is that within 2.5 years they should be created at the very latest, start to be created, and no later than the third year before the expiration of that third year of the investor's residence under the law.
Good. And so when we're talking about within 2.5 years of adjudication, we're talking about 2.5 years of their I-526 adjudication.
After the approval of the I-526. So and that rule was generally put into place many years ago because they believed it would take 6 months for the investor to be admitted for permanent residence, and then they would have a 2 year residence period. So they wanted to see that jobs were actually commencing during that period. We know now that not all residents in the past have been able to enter the US or be admitted for permanent residence within 6 months, although there are waiting times in the past for pre-RA investors, but it's those rules I think could change a little bit given some of the other requirements, but it's basically because of when the investor is expected to arrive as a permanent resident during their 2 year period.
They have a leftover tidbit of the old parts of EB-5, the pre-RA parts of EB-5, which got completely out of line in terms of when you could actually expect to have that adjudication. But given the post-RIA adjudications and the ability for I-526, it's starting to come back again a little bit, but that's a different subject. So thank you. So within 2.5 years of the I-526, because the I-526 stage and at the 956F stage, job creation is theoretical, right? I mean, this is
Right.
all that's going into a model, right? So then the actual proving of the job creation comes at the IA-29 phase, right? This is the phase at which point
Right.
you are looking to prove that this job creation had occurred so that you can have the conditions to be moved from your green card.
Right, correct. The period is based on exactly that. The process, the procedural timeframes of when the 956F becomes approved. Obviously, those are some of the conditions in order to that have to be met for any investor, in addition to the general timelines of the procedure or the flow of the investor's case.
Great, thank you. And so I guess with that, because I think that what's important, because when we keep talking about job creation, I think a question that comes up frequently is, well, I don't know that how do we know how is this this investment that's going to have on 100 investors that's going to create 1,000 jobs. There's going to be 1,000 people that are working at this construction site. They're going to be and they have a little bit
Right.
of question when it comes to that.
Right.
So to that
Right.
point, I think it's helpful to talk through to people about the fact that when we talk about job creation, we're talking about model driven induced jobs, which is by
Right.
far the more common pathway rather than of job creation, rather than say direct job creation of a direct worker works for a W-2. So maybe if you could just talk a
Right.
little bit about how the different models work within regional center projects, and
Yeah.
how these different models can influence job creation, and maybe as far as that goes with the different capital stacks as well.
Yeah, great questions. So, under the EB-5 Regional Center program, we're able to use indirect job creation supported by reasonable economic methodologies. So, for many decades, there have been the use of economic impact studies all across various industries that can tell us how many jobs are created indirectly based on the flow of capital from any type of business. So money goes into the economy via the purchase of goods and labor or construction, for example, and there's an impact, there's an effect that can be measured as a result of that economic driven input, or if you will, money being spent in the economy. So through these types of models, they're very scientific, in my opinion. They do allow the government to accept models that can say, okay, 1,000 jobs are going to be coming simply from construction, or simply from hard costs and maybe some soft costs, from revenues, from different things that can happen in the project, including the money that is paid as salary to the workers. And that money is then spent by the workers, and that has another effect downstream in the economy. The typical models that you'll see in any EB-5 project are usually going to be RIMS 2 or implant. Either of those two are generally accepted models. There is a third model that one economist created himself and is accepted as well, and we've seen that sometimes. But RIMS 2 and implant are typically the most common ones that you'll see, that will tell you for every dollar or millions of dollars that is spent, how many jobs are created based on a multiplier in that particular part of the United States, and how many jobs are being created as a result. So if we're able to document and show that a project's going to cost $100 million in just construction costs, and there are detailed reports that say it's going to be $75 million in hard costs, soft costs, which would be architects and other engineers that are helping to get a project developed. Many of those can be utilized as well. And then maybe the project's going to have forecasted revenues. So all of those can be put into the computer model by the economist to determine how many jobs are created. So you can think of it, in my preferred way to explain it to clients who are sometimes debating over whether they want to do their own project, standalone project, is like a lemon approach. If you're making lemonade, when you make lemonade, you can, if you have a really good machine, you can squeeze out all the juice and you can get the rind and everything out of it. So when you do a direct project, it might just be like maybe using some of the rind on top of it. But with EB-5 regional center projects, you can get the full amount uh, of the juice, if you will, out of that lemon from indirect job creation, and you get more value that way. So the economic impact model, excuse me, basically can help us to easily analyze how many jobs are being created from this project. Then the question becomes, well, what type of jobs are they? Are all jobs created equal? On the indirect model, are they jobs that are created from construction? Are they jobs that are created from revenue? Well, in my opinion, I think it's probably easier to look at a proposed development and say, okay, we think your costs for developing this project have been laid out, and that's probably predictable. And then, how do you exactly show that revenues are going to occur? You can have different studies and things that will show you what the revenues might be, but at the end of the day, these investors are coming in and the revenues may not have always occurred. So if there is a fluctuation in a project's revenues, no matter how great the project might be, if they start having to slash off the prices of their development condos by 50%, for example, that might be 50% less revenue. Then the questions are, what type of jobs are being allocated to those investors or being predicted as being that will be utilized in the investor's case? Will they be only construction jobs? Will they be revenue jobs? Will they be induced spending? What type of job is actually going to be utilized by those investors? And then other questions, of course, can come into it regarding what type of a source of fund is being utilized in the project. Is it debt that is going to maybe drain on the project's ability to generate those, to generate revenues later on? Those are other aspects of it that are very important, I think, for an investor to consider too. But fundamentally, I think when you look at job creation versus of one project that's going to rely solely on construction jobs versus one that's using a mix of both and is heavily reliant perhaps on revenue jobs, you have to be aware as an investor of the risks of that, not simply for your exit strategy of getting your money back, but for you might very well get your money back no matter what, but how are these jobs going to turn out if you need 1,000 jobs and 40% of them are coming from construction and 60% are coming from revenues? Then if that 60% doesn't exactly occur, maybe only 40% of the investors get their 10-year green cards and 60% of them don't. Um, those are things that you need to understand, and a competent counsel can help you to go through that.
Just an awesome point, because just as you're describing this, it's one of those things that when I say is when you're talking to a good, strong immigration, or better said, a good, strong EB-5 attorney like yourself, these are the types of things that an attorney is going to be looking at for you, because this is a financial instrument, and there's no doubt about it that this is an at-risk financial instrument that you're looking at, and someone like a great attorney like yourself, you're not going to be judging this on how viable of an investment opportunity is. What you would be helping to judge on is how viable of a immigration-linked investment this is, and does the immigration portion of this potentially meet the immigration goals of this particular investor. And so it's something that I explain often, but just hearing you talk through the different things to look at from a job creation standpoint is a huge part of what you would do. Is the model from a job creation standpoint viable? Is it going to create the jobs? Is it too highly concentrated in one spot? And what are the risks that could be there in place to the actual ultimate job creation that comes? Because a lot of times people, and when they talk about projects, they will really treat these aspects as a foregone conclusion. That of course you're going to get all the jobs there created, of course they're going to be there, look at the model and everything is fine. But these are the important points that people need to be looking at when they are considering an investment of this sort. And really, this kind of brings me to kind of the last section I wanted to touch upon, was the different risks to consider when evaluating the job creation of a project. You really touched on very eloquently the different ways that you should look at the different sources of job creation that could be coming, and how some of these sources could be variable. And I would say, and you would probably say it in a much better way than I, but you want to make sure that the pathways that are being contemplated for this job creation are ones that are more viable and really
Reliable.
Yeah. And I guess maybe some of the other, maybe if you want to just maybe talk to maybe some of the other risk factors that maybe one should look at when looking at the job creation aspect of their EB-5 investment.
Sure. So there are questions that I end up having with different projects where we are we are looking sometimes, well, what is that source of the additional capital in the stack? For example, in some states, here in Florida, for example, I'm not sure about up in New York and others, um, deposits towards the purchase of a condominium in the building can be considered as part of the capital stack and be considered equity, right? So is that really a good mechanism? What happens if the project doesn't finish? Those funds need to be in escrow at the project level or something. Those are some things to be wary of. Exactly, is the capital stack being fully explained in the PPM to the investor? What types of sources are better than other sources? Government backed funding might I think be better. There are advantages to projects that are tied in through maybe more assured financing from the project. Do they have institutional financing in the project versus very costly debt that might pose other issues down the line on their ability to complete construction? A lot of projects also will provide you these guarantees of construction guarantees. And my question always is that just a paper promise? Where is the rest of the tangible asset or something that's pledged there if they don't fulfill their equity that's in the stack? How do you verify all those things? And that's something I will I do look at, because if the project doesn't fulfill the stack despite it saying that it's there, then there's not enough job creation even for construction. So um, understanding that with a trusted regional center that can provide us the documentation that shows that this construction will happen come hell or high water, will occur, is very important. And that those are some of the questions I might ask you, or you may not expect it from every immigration attorney, but those are questions I ask that involve what is this, what is the source? Is this likely to, how do we prove this is really going to occur? And you know we ask those questions, and I know you guys, from the past projects that you recently had, maybe if I could throw a question back at you, what are the examples of the characteristics of the underwriting that is done by the regional center in providing this loan to a developer? Assuming that it's a regional center that is operating as the manager of the NCE and is strictly underwriting this and loaning the funds out, and isn't also the developer of the project. Those are other risks and issues that can occur where the developer is the regional center. It's not illegal, but it raises other points. So, that is really something that I do end up having to think about depending on the project. And the size of the project. Is it one that we can really see tangible information about? Is it too big to fail? Type of situation, etc. And maybe Pete, you could tell me about some of the characteristics you as you're that CanAm actually looks to for underwriting these types of deals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And all of these things are great questions to be asked. And these are things that we are prepared for in advance when we are underwriting for our investors. I mean, what we want to make sure that we have is as many protections as possible built into our capital stack, built into the financing of it, built into our sources, to make sure that these are all good, viable pathways for the exhibition of job creation as it comes to the IAT9 stage. I mean, first off, we want to make sure that a project has its capitalization fully in place between the amount that we're raising, the equity that will be there, if there is another debt component potentially in the project, that these are all things that are finalized, and that the qualifying expenditures that are going to be made are very well documented and consistently exhibited as good pathways for source of funds. We most all of our projects, especially going back for the last a bunch of years, we'll make sure that we do get a completion guarantee from the group that we are borrowing the funds from. There will be a guarantor in place so that we can get that extra layer of comfort to know that if there were some cost overruns, if there were to be something that were to go along with it, that borrower understands that they need to make those qualifying expenditures and that job creation aspect of it is completed. And then very important to us is we got to make sure that there is a buffer for the job creation. Because like you said, we want to go with predictable sources, and we do. But you don't want to go into an investment where you need to create 1,000 jobs and you're expecting to create 1,001. We want to make sure that we will take a very conservative estimate of the job creation that's coming from the project in the first place. And then even on top of that, we'll take a very significant job creation buffer. So generally there's a very strong multiple of jobs that are going to be created per investor to make sure that we are getting all the job creation for all the people that are coming into.
And is that buffer of construction jobs?
Buffer of construction jobs. And making sure that we have that in place to meet the needs of our investors. I mean, we also want to make sure that it's very clear that there is a good, strong nexus of our spending to the job creation, right? Because this is the EB-5 program is an economic development. It's not a, let's take out equity from other sources program, right? I mean, so we want to make sure that when the project goes in, that we don't start documenting jobs until we have our situation within the projects squared away. And so that there is a clear, when you're going to exhibit these jobs down the line, nexus to that job creation, which kind of brings me, to shoot it back to you again. It's something that we will have that comes up from time to time as people will talk about, oh, well, the jobs are already created, so there's no risk at all in the project. And, we don't have to worry about it, and the jobs are already done. Maybe talk us through where there could be, because that's not to say that there aren't pre-contemplated agreements where EB-5 funds are coming in to potentially move out previous funds. It could be coming in as bridge financing, and it could be taking the place of other financing. But when we talk about this notion of jobs that have already been created, maybe talk a little bit about some of the risk that is there for this notion of job creation that's already done.
So this is founded upon the policy by the EB-5 program at USCIS that says that contemplated loan agreements that were going to be replaced with EB-5 capital, or if they weren't contemplated, you may have certain short-term financing debt that may be replaced later on with EB-5 capital. And so long as it meets some of those definitions, which are very, very limited, then it can be replaced by the EB-5 investor, even though the jobs that were created as a result of the spending from that pre-existing debt and the jobs that were created from that pre-existing debt, those jobs can be allocated and credited to the investor. However, there is pushback by USCIS at times where they do want to make sure that the loan was really short-term or temporary financing. And how long should that be? How many years has it been since that loan was initially deployed, and is it fully matured? What is, when you say nexus, what we look for is there a benefit, I think, or a risk somehow to the project if those EB-5 investors didn't come in to take out that debt? If that debt is still in the project and those investors don't replace it, how could that imperil the project or the rest of things? That, I think, is some of the nexus that you look for. But when it's too far out in time, if it's more than a few years, you might be a little bit worried, even though they've been approved with an exemplar or now what we call a 956F application. How will the government react later on at the time when you're trying to remove the conditions on your permanent residence, when they ask typically, and I've seen this happen on projects I've represented, where the financing gets questioned many years later. That is not necessarily a situation you want to have to be in if they start to question that. So if the jobs are being created at the time your investments going in or being deployed right there directly into the project, that is definitely a lot better than having to try to use bridge financing. It's not to say, like you said, that there's anything wrong with it. It's just which one is better than the other. And certainly, if you have direct spending from the investor's capital into the project, that's more that's more reliable than the pre-existing debt that it's taking out. You want to be careful because I've had clients go into projects that the loan has been out there for quite a while. Maybe that also raises other issues of financial stability of the project if they've had this debt on there for so many years and they have to replace it. That might be a whole other line of questions that maybe result, I suppose, for why is the investor coming in so late now? And if the project's already developed, then is the fund from the investors going to be further redeployed immediately after? So those are some unusual questions because that's the way the policy plainly reads. But then the government can come back in later on and question the project about whether or not there is any relationship, any nexus between the bridge financing originally at the 526 stage by the investors many years later. So it's definitely a consideration when you're looking at short-term financing that's being taken out. You want to be careful with that.
Really well said. Yeah, I think that the easiest way to say it is you nailed it is be careful. And these are questions that you need to, because you want to make sure that this is as safe and as conservative a pathway as you can take when you're going forward with this. And being careful means making sure that you're asking these questions, doing it beforehand, because by the time sometimes many of these things come up where you think that you're being careful by saying, well, it's already done, so what could be better than that? Well, just to be aware of the potential risks that could be there, because unfortunately, the time frame when some of these things do come up is pretty far down the line. It's pretty far after, and really, it's at a spot where you don't really have a whole lot of recourse. So it's the type of question, the type of thing you want to be careful and be sure of at the beginning part of the process.
Right. I think it's a huge a plus to go into a project where you don't have to really tangle up too much with pre-existing debt, if possible. Um, Again, it always depends, but it definitely is a pro of a pro move to consider a project that has a very little pre-existing debt that's being replaced. Preferably, maybe even I've seen projects with zero debt. They're just simply working with government-backed financing, are receiving other sources of capital into the project that can make it, I think, more desirable for those investors.
So let's say that you do get to the I-829 phase and all the job creation hasn't yet been completed. Do you have any sort of recourse? Do you still have additional time perhaps for the project to still create those jobs that are necessary? What
Yeah.
sort of situation are you in at that point?
Yeah, so the policy has been for many years that um, if the jobs were not created by the time you file the 829, which is the 90-day period before the investor's a permanent 2-year permanent residence expires, they generally will want you to demonstrate that before the end of the 3rd year, so within that 2nd and 3rd year, those jobs will be commenced or created somehow, and to demonstrate maybe what happens. There is a change to the law that was passed by the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2022, or the RIA for short, that says that an investor may request that USCIS give them that additional 3rd year. We haven't had a change in policy yet that reflects this reflects this new way to get that third year. Um, and I think it'd be interesting if they put that burden on investors to do that, since you've always just simply been able to file the 829 and show this is where we are, this is what's going to happen. And because 829 processing can be several years long, usually by that time there's a request for evidence and you can further document, hopefully, that the jobs have been created. Um, but it's a very serious concern if the jobs ultimately do not get created. Then you have to, look at what other options can an investor have. Do they need to put in additional capital themselves, or does the project need additional capital? There are changes in the RA that say that investors may be able to, I think, put in additional capital, but then they might have to do an amended I-526 to fix things. I think that is a scenario that hasn't probably played out much yet, but it's a way for investors to be able to protect themselves. There are other things that can happen for investors, actions that the investors can take to protect themselves under the RIA, under the protections for treatment of good faith investors. There is a section under the RIA that provides more guidance there, and we'll see. But some of these things also depend upon what's happened at the NC level, at the project level, or the funding level. Are there other things that have really gone wrong to the point of maybe criminality? And those are things you have to be careful with and choose the right regional center that has conducted has done really good underwriting on a project, and has complied with the intent of the law, and not just barely with the law by not really providing you information about who those developers are, submitting those developers to possibly to background checks and so on as required under the regional center program today.
Exactly. And I think that kind of takes us back to a little bit of our final point here, because there's nothing quite as helpful to decision making as a little bit of scare tactic, right? But I think ultimately when you look at this, you want to work with a really good attorney who knows the different aspects that they should be looking at, and you want to work with a regional center that is taking the most conservative pathway to be able to get
Right.
you to this endpoint. Because when done right,
Right.
this is
Right.
it's a great program, and there's a great ways for people to go forward.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Right. And that basically, brings up some other points. To the credit of CanAm, I think CanAm's the only, as far as I know, the only regional center that has a in-house broker dealer. Others hire broker dealers, which are licensed companies to make recommendations on to EB-5 investors, but also can provide a level of compliance to those companies and help them to make sure that they're complying with securities laws, which is the requirement under the RIA. Now, regional centers don't have to necessarily, I think, hire a broker dealer. There's no requirement, I think, in the RIA for that directly, but they do have to comply. There's no requirement that the projects and the regional centers have a fund administrator, but it's probably a good idea to do that. So you don't have to have an escrow agent that is among some of the leading escrow agent companies, but it's a good idea to do that. So what steps has the project and the regional center done to ensure that it will be compliant under securities laws, under the more of the spirit of the EB-5 laws of fund administration, of reporting to clients? Regional centers need to communicate with clients regularly about the status quo of the project and not just disappear when things go wrong, but stay in touch with those investors, because that's going to be the best level of customer support. And especially for me as an attorney, if a client chooses a project or regional center that simply isn't providing us information, it makes me kind of look bad, because the regional center should be providing information to those clients, hopefully on a quarterly basis. If not, I don't know if anyone does it more often than that, but when they're not, clients, want to know, especially if their 526 is taking a long time to be processed. They want to know what's happening with the project, even years later. it's very important to choose the right operator of the regional center that you're joining.
Yeah, well said. You're making my job easier here,
Yeah.
but yeah, but putting together best practices is what leads to the best outcomes for people, and we take a lot of pride on that side of it. So I appreciate you mentioning that. But yeah, and it's another point when you're talking to a regional center to just look through some of these aspects of best practices approach to all these different steps, not just talking about, oh, we're going to create 10 jobs per investor, so you don't have to worry about it. Well, how do you get to that point? And how do you do it? And talking about the construction of your project and taking all the care and measured approaches that need to be done on the project level itself, but also the backbone of the regional center that you're talking about, and the best practices approach that they take to all these things is going to be what leads to that great project creation. So these are, again, the types of questions that you want to be asking when you are approaching a regional center and trying to make this all important decision.
Right. This is a multi-year relationship you're going to have with a company as an investor, and being treated right is it's incredibly beneficial if you're working with a company that knows what it's doing in this program, and frankly knows how to work with its investors.
Couldn't agree more. Well, you know what, Michael, I think that this was a lot of information for people. I hope that this was helpful for people. I know that it's informative for me. I love hearing you talk about these sorts of things, but I really appreciate your time. I think that this was great. And, we would happily talk to anyone who has any questions, any further questions about job creation or project construction another time. But with that, Michael, Principal of Harris Law, thank you so much for joining us, and we really appreciate all of your insights and time.
My pleasure. Thanks again to you and CanAm for hosting this.
Pleasure.